Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased today to be able to rise today and talk about this important piece of legislation. And before I get into talking about the specific pieces of legislation, I want to talk about a couple of things that build on the accomplishments that we've made as a government with our economic agenda. First of all, talk about, of course, 820,000 net new jobs since 2009. Strong jobs growth here in this country. Mr. Speaker, Canada's economy has expanded for 9 of the 10 past quarters. This is a great track record, one of the best in the G7. Canada's unemployment rate is well below that of the United States. Mr. Speaker, I can't stress enough how significant this is. This is the first time that that's happened in more than 3 decades, and we continue to see a stronger, a lower unemployment rate here in Canada than the United States, and that is absolutely a direct benefit of the policies of this government and, of course, the Economic Action Plan. And, Mr. Speaker, the list goes on and on. Forbes magazine has ranked Canada #1 in the world for businesses to grow and create jobs. And what's that going to do, Mr. Speaker? Of course, getting an award like that, that's going to lead to more direct investment in Canada, which is going to lead to a stronger economy, and it's going to lead to more jobs for Canadians. Canada has one of the strongest fiscal positions in the G7. Fitch Ratings, Moody's and Standard & Poor's have all renewed Canada's rock-solid AAA credit rating. Again, Mr. Speaker, this is a direct result of Canada's Economic Action Plan. Canada has taken its place among the top 5 countries with the most economic freedom, according to a new Fraser Institute report. We are now leaps and bounds ahead of the United States. These things all clearly show that our government is on the right track with our economic policies. We're going to continue to expand the economy and grow jobs. And, Mr. Speaker, the amazing thing, of course, is all of these accomplishments have been accomplished without a carbon tax, and of course we're going to make sure there isn't a $21 billion carbon tax to derail all of these accomplishments. Now, some of the things that I want to talk about, some of the highlights, Mr. Speaker, some of the important things that will be implemented. We're talking about extending the hiring credit for small business up to $1,000 to encourage additional hiring and lowering of business payroll taxes. Mr. Speaker, that will lower business payroll taxes by an amazing $205 million. And, Mr. Speaker, the amazing thing about that as well is this has helped 536,000 employers across Canada. Think about that. That's a huge number of businesses, small businesses. And, of course, small businesses, we all know, especially on the Conservative side of the House, they are the ones that drive the economy. They are benefiting from this policy. $110 million to the National Research Council to increase support through the Industrial Research Assistance Program and Industrial Technology Advisors. Investing in technology that's going to move our economy forward. $95 million over 3 years and $40 million per year ongoing to make the Canada Innovation Commercialization Project permanent. Mr. Speaker, this is a very important initiative. We have to move these technological advancements to commercialization so we can continue to be successful not only here in Canada, but of course in the ever-competitive global economic market. There's also $14 million to expand the Industrial Research and Development Internship Program, which will place more PhD students in practical business internships. So that, again, is going to benefit our business. Mr. Speaker, talking about another wonderful program, we've extended the accelerated capital cost allowance for manufacturers to purchase processing machinery and equipment. I've heard directly from businesses in my riding how important this is. This allows them to invest in new machinery, new equipment, and quickly write off the cost of that, purchasing that new equipment, which improves productivity, therefore makes our businesses more productive. Mr. Speaker, enhancing the productivity of our businesses is very important and, of course, is going to spur economic growth. We've also increased the lifetime capital gains exemption, which allows capital capital gains on qualifying small business shares to be realized tax-free. We've increased that from $500,000 to $750,000. This is the first increase since 1988. Mr. Speaker, here we think that overtaxing capital gains is not a good idea. I want to talk about clean energy and the economy, because that's important as well. We're investing $97 million to develop and promote clean energy technologies, $1 billion for priorities such as green energy, generation, transmission infrastructure, carbon transmission, and storage infrastructure. We also have $1 billion to support pulp and paper mills to reduce greenhouse gas emissions. $1 billion in support of clean energy research and development demonstration projects. $252 million to support regulatory activities to address climate change and air quality. Mr. Speaker, the list goes on and on. Our government has made significant investments in the clean energy economy. I also, Mr. Speaker, want to talk about the amendments to land designation. This is a very important piece of legislation. We on the Conservative side of the House believe that we have to allow our First Nations communities to move at the speed of business. They have to be able to engage in land transactions to be able to spur their economies. Mr. Speaker, one of the most powerful things that we have in Canada is the ability to leverage our land and be able to use that for financing and development. We want to be able to help First Nations to be able to do that. We're doing a couple of things. First of all, we're going to reduce the voting threshold to a simple majority vote when you're dealing with land designations as opposed to the majority of the majority. Why is that important? Well, Mr. Speaker, it's going to speed up the process of approving land designations on reserve. The current process can take 1 to 2 years, with 2 votes that can span 4 to 6 months. It's going to reduce the cost of doing business with First Nations, as well as reduce the expenses in the designation process. And Mr. Speaker, some may criticize this, but I can tell you this. A majority vote is currently sufficient to elect the Chief and Council of a First Nation to accept multi-million-dollar out-of-court settlements and accept a settlement of a specific claim with a value of between $3 to $7 million. If a majority vote is good enough for those kinds of things, Mr. Speaker, a majority vote is good enough for a land designation. The second aspect of that is the removal of the government in council requirement for approval. Mr. Speaker, Section 39 of the Indian Act requires that the Governor and Council approve land designations. Given that lands do not lose their reserve status, this level of authorization, we believe, is counterproductive to Canada's efforts to support economic development on reserve. By allowing the Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development to authorize the land designation, this will, again, reduce the time required for land designations. This will reduce costs for economic development on reserve. And, of course, it will spur the development of those local economies. Mr. Speaker, we're also amending the Navigable Waters Protection Act. It is one of the oldest pieces of legislation, dating back from 1882, at a time when our waterways were the primary transportation routes. Mr. Speaker, this Act's main purpose was to facilitate trade and commerce by balancing the efficient movement of maritime traffic with the need to construct works, bridges, etc. Over time, the scope of this Act has increased significantly due to many factors. The Act now applies to all waters in Canada. Imagine that. It even applies to a temporary creek that is developed by a spring runoff and would dry up within a month or two. That would trigger a review under the Act. That is not the purpose of this Act. It is a hindrance to economic development. Mr. Speaker, the vast majority of our waterways will still continue to be protected by Transport Canada's marine safety laws, the Fisheries Act, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, and various provincial statutes. We're going to continue to protect our waterways, but also make amendments to allow business to move faster and things to move quicker. Mr. Speaker, this is a great piece of legislation, and I'm hopeful that the members on this side of the House will see the light, not continue to propose amendments like changing the implementation date 365 times, which has no purpose. Vote for this, vote for the economy, and let's move forward. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Well done.
Question et commentaire, l'honorable député de Beauport-Limoilou.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Président. Merci à mon collègue pour son discours. Je voudrais juste lui faire remarquer que c'est un membre des plus riches qui sont recensés dans le magazine Forbes qui, malheureusement, a vidé en bonne partie le fonds de pension des travailleurs de l'usine Sadacona à Québec. Ceci étant, je vais l'amener sur un autre sujet, un sujet à peine moins joyeux. Vous savez, le premier ministre, en 1994, avait critiqué le gouvernement libéral de l'époque parce qu'il avait déposé un projet de loi omnibus. Puis je dois vous avouer que les mots qu'il a utilisés, j'aurais pas trouvé vraiment beaucoup mieux, malgré mes efforts. Je déplore cependant que le gouvernement ait choisi d'en faire un projet de loi omnibus parce qu'il a regroupé des éléments que nous appuyons et d'autres auxquels nous nous opposons. Ce projet de loi sera renvoyé à un seul comité qui ne disposera pas de l'expertise voulue pour étudier un projet de loi de cette envergure. Monsieur le Président, au-delà des manœuvres qui ont tenté de justifier des supposées études dans d'autres comités, comment mon collègue peut sans rire défendre la décision du gouvernement de présenter un projet de loi omnibus aussi massif et impossible à étudier?
For Brampton West.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I, of course, thank my colleague for the question. What I'd say is this, Mr. Speaker. This is where we are. They're going to argue about process because the actual piece of legislation they know is going to be an excellent thing for Canadians and for the Canadian economy. So all they're left with is to attack the process. And that tells you exactly how good this piece of legislation is, Mr. Speaker. I'll tell you one more thing. He wants to talk about what leaders of parties have said. Well, what does the leader of his party say? We're going to impose a $21 billion carbon tax, and we're going to generate billions of dollars from this program. That's not what we're going to do, Mr. Speaker.
Here, here.
Questions and comments. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of National Revenue.
I'd like to thank my fellow colleague from Etobicoke Lakeshore in terms of really having a nice summary in terms of what this bill is doing and what it's how it's going to be so important for our economy. I found it ironic to listen to the member from Parkdale Hyde Park in terms of the things that she thought should be in the bill, and she added item after item after item after item, which to me showed that she recognized that a budget plan needs to be comprehensive. So I think you would like to perhaps share with the members here how it is important to have a comprehensive plan to deal with the economy and how this bill does just that. Thank you.
The Honourable Member for Brampton West.
Well, thank you for the question. It is ironic that they say that this piece of legislation has too much in it, but then they propose thousands of amendments to put more things in. I'm not sure I understand the logic in that. You certainly can't have it both ways, Mr. Speaker, but what it does point out is exactly what the member has said. It points out that this piece of legislation is an important driver of the economy. It needs to be expansive and include all kinds of things to move the economy forward. That's why we're doing it. And of course, the most important thing is what's not in it, a $21 billion carbon tax, which is one of the things I'm sure they would love to stuff in there if they could.
Here, here.
Question et commentaire, l'honorable député de Rivière-des-Mille-Îles. Oh, pardon-moi. Beauport-Salvary.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. Et puis, j'aimerais juste dire qu'en effet, nous, on s'objecte totalement au processus parce que c'est un projet de loi massif qui n'a pas respecté du tout les débats en Chambre, le temps de débat. Et en plus, il n'y a pas beaucoup de à peu près pas de consultation. Mais si je reviens sur la loi sur la protection des eaux navigables, ce qui est le plus inquiétant, c'est que les conservateurs remettent le fardeau de la responsabilité entre les mains des citoyens qui devront eux-mêmes amener devant la Cour les promoteurs de projets qui n'ont plus besoin de demander des consultations publiques et dont les projets n'auront plus besoin non plus de faire l'objet de permis d'évaluation, de demandes d'évaluation environnementale parce que les permis vont être totalement accordés. Alors, comment le député peut justifier toutes ces décisions-là qui vont à l'encontre des intérêts publics?
The Honourable Member for Brampton West, short answer, please.
Yeah, well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'm going to explain to my colleague that, first of all, there's still lots of things left to protect our waterways, and I mentioned them in my speech. Perhaps you didn't hear them. It's not just necessarily with navigable waters. Of course, there's Transportation Canada's maritime safety laws, the Fisheries Act, the Canadian Environmental Assessment Act, all these things, the Species at Risk Act. All these things are still going to be there to protect the water in the country. Those are the pieces of legislation that should be doing it, not the Navigable Beds of Waters Act. And of course, Mr. Speaker, I'm just going to finish off the important thing that's not in there and will never be in there, a $21 billion carbon tax.
Here, here.